Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest episode of Tales from Outer Space, taken from the subreddit HFY. The links to all the stories will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. And if you do, please consider subscribing. Story number 1, For the Fallen Gods, written by British Tea Company. There was a long quiet in the room, followed by a series of half-hearted nods and some murmuring and discussion. The specimen in question was a hairy creature for sure, black and white with wisps dotting its entire body, as it lay sprawled and unconscious within the containment chamber. The sleeping ape was truly an ugly sight to behold. It opened its mouth, revealing 2 large canines as it closed its eyes, seeming bent on permanent scowl. "Wake it up, then." A jolt filled the air within the containment chamber as the creature quite literally roared to life. It swiped at the air with its massive paws, a snarl emanating from his throat as he looked through the reinforced glass and glared daggers at the scientists behind it. Giving a savage's pound against the screen, it did little beyond hurting its own hand as it relented, coldly, watching the captors in the other room. "First things first, are you human?" Even though this thing was little more than an animal in the eyes of the researchers, it was undeniable a trace of surprise shot through the creature after being asked that question. Pausing for a moment to recollect his own thoughts, it faced the delegation with its other room and let out a harsh laugh. The translator pinged. "So, am I going to just be bombarded with stupid questions?" "I'll take that as a yes." A jolt was sent again in the chamber for the creature's insolence. It growled against the shock, but did little more than flinch as it hatefully glowered upon the gathered presiding over it. Sitting back down and taking a few deep breaths, there was a momentary pause before the next question was sent forward. "Where have your people been all this time?" "Hidden away from such as yourself so that we could bide our eventual return in secret," the translator said as the creature returned with a series of grunts. Such behavior was bestial by most standards of the galaxy, all the more a reminder of how the most advanced civilization had fallen. "That is rather obvious, but I was looking for a more exact location. Our records suggest all human colonies had been destroyed during the Great Uprising. There is no way any of your kind should have been able to survive. And I would be split in the face in the fallen gods if I betrayed my kin by revealing to you the locations of our strongholds. Try whatever means of interrogation you have, I will not reveal such things." The ape was visibly agitated as it pressed itself against the glass, snarling as it closed the people around it. Still, the officers remained undaunted as he looked at the stocky creature right in the eyes, giving a slight sigh. "We will reserve that for later. For the time being, who are these fallen gods you speak of? There was a little recordings indicating such entities before your empire's destruction. What new masters do you serve?" The masters he referred to were the ones that we always have served. Even in the wake of their demise, we still do, for we will never forget the fallen gods that had uplifted us. The ape rose from its seat and shook its head, chuckling as if it felt the room shake. "Looking surprised, let me answer your earlier question. I am not human. I never was. When the gods fell, they passed all their legacy to us. Before, we were merely brutes in the jungle. Now we stand to reclaim the honor of our forefathers." The room shook from a maw as the ape grinned, watching the rubble fall from the ceiling. Plasma shots here heard in the distance along with the harsh grunts of his kin. Moments later, an explosion rocked the room and slaying all but him. A band of comrades had arrived, clad in armor. One of his friends arrived to the glass and beckoned the captive to move away from the blast zone. Moments later, the containment field failed, and the prisoner stepped out, free at last. "About time, my friends," the gorilla said as he stepped out with a smile, collecting a spare set from his friends. He gave a chuckle and then stretched. "Time we raise this world to the ground, but first, does anyone have any bananas? These bastards haven't fed me since." End of story. Story number 2, Friendship, written by Glacialfury. Okay, class. Pretense tapped a talon fingertip on the door of the Orion Heritage Museum. Today we learn about the Battle of Perseus III. She swept a shimmering feathered arm out in an arc before her, dotting on the monotone, grating voice to a large class of heavy-eyed students who valiantly fought off sleep before their entrance to the museum. A decisive military engagement fought between the Xerxes Empire and the relatively unknown species at the time called humans. Pretense met with her students' drowsy stares for 4 piercing eyes before continuing. By the end of this tour, you will understand why this event was so crucial in shaping the current galactic climate of freedom and liberty that we all enjoy today. What's a Xerxes? A small, synthesized voice asked from the back of the gathered students. Its teacher's eyes traveled across the sea of curious faces to the near rear of the class, where the wolf-steed pup stood blinking curiously, with paws folded comfortably behind her back and big, sparkly eyes that caught and reflected the fire of the afternoon sun. Pretense cleared her throat loudly to show disapproval at being interrupted. The Xerxes are a hideously intelligent race of aggressive, methane-breathing insectoids that dominated the middle belt systems of the galaxy during the pre-war years, when our equally violent predecessors still embraced the passion of war. She paused for a moment to take sure that the pup had no follow-up questions, and then continued. They are now practically extinct, with just a few devolved hunter-gatherer colonies left roaming the desolate wasteland of their decimated homeworld. The wolf's steep pup blinked in big brown eyes in surprise, then twitched wiry whiskers from side to side in the wolf's nod for understanding. Oh. Pretense waved away the surge of paws and other appendages that shot up in the air full of questions. I'll answer all your questions in due time, but inside the museum, she informed the class warily, nodding her beak to the door. We have a timetable to keep to. With that, she began ushering her class into the museum to start her virtual tour. Once inside, they were approached by a museum administrator who showed them to the holosuites where their journey would begin. Once everyone was seated in their virtual matrix, and disembodied voice began to speak. It started with a lesson on the violent history of the Xerxes Empire. It talked about the aggressive, expansionist, warlike ways and how it led to several conflicts with the neighboring civilizations, which resulted in a string of Xerxes victories, territory concessions, and the surrounding nations forced into the role of tributary states with the growing Xerxes Empire. Still unsatisfied with the broad sphere of influence they controlled, the Xerxes Empire initiated an aggressive expansion campaign that swallowed up what remained of the smaller neighbors, and ultimately saw the larger nations capitulate before the might of the Xerxes war machine. Eventually, they found themselves in uncharted territory where they encountered the Orion Federation, a nation of ill-tempered feathered bipeds who would rise to challenge them for supremacy, becoming their principal rival for generations to come. A bloody, protracted war quickly followed the first contact. It's still unclear who fired the first shot, but what we do know is dozens of worlds and billions of lives bore the agony of the warfare that was unleashed. The war that raged on for generations until both empires were hollowed out husks of their former greatness, until their cities and infrastructure lie in smoldering ruins, their economies gutted. Civilians battered and bloodied, violent protests, deadly riots, and the remnant firestorms that blazed across the land, all contributing to the war-weary nations agreeing to an armistice that ended decades of nightmarish warfare. But it wouldn't be the lasting peace. While the war-shocked people of the Orion Federation concentrated on rebuilding their shattered worlds, the Xerxes Empire committed its resources to restore and replenish its armies. One of the advantages of controlling a nation of fanatical Zediots is that they don't require creature comforts or conveniences. All they need is an essential nutrition, weapons, and which to kill their enemies, and the glory of the Empire. They would gladly sacrifice everything, including their lives, for the honor of the Empire. The Orion Federation moved away from war and devoted its resources to science and exploration. They charted hundreds of new systems, built colonies and mining operations all across the sector. Eventually, they came across paths with a friendly species of hominids who called themselves human while exploring a remote area of the Perseus arm. but the memory of the brutal Xerti War was still fresh in the minds of most, so the citizens of the Orion Federation were dubious of the headless apes, at first. But the friendly humans persisted. They offered gifts, cultural exchanges, and abridged the language barrier by assisting with translation. Their scientists shared technology, medicine, and a new method of faster-than-light travel. Human musicians blew the Orion away with powerful, soul-stirring music and brought them to tears and haunted their auditory membranes long after the final note played away. The stunned Orion had never experienced such an exquisite sound. It was beautiful. Humans called them friend. But the Orion's people didn't understand the human concept of friendship. Sure, they had spouses, offspring, and large families that were part of even a larger clan. But they were all related. Nobody had non-relative friends, and an entire idea was alien to the Orions. The human scholars tried on every different occasion to convey the concept of friendship, but even after all the gifts, exchanges, and cordial talks, the word friendship and the meaning behind it was still lost to the Orion. The social institution of friendship was a uniquely human notion. Part of the exchange saw a human ambassador named Yuri King stationed on board an Orion star cruiser Neverspray, bound for the Orion defensive citadel on Perseus III, when the Xerti Empire inexplicably attacked. Ambassador King was able to get the distress call into subspace, relaying the unprovoked attack on the human authorities, before the star cruiser was utterly destroyed, along with her fighter escorts. The Xerti Armada swarmed into the Orion system and turned their attention to destroying the defensive fleet stationed nearby, before laying siege to the defending citadel and all outlying colonies. This was not the Xerti from yesteryear. They were more potent and wicked to the core. Their ships dealt with the business of death and shattered the defenses put before them. The citadel was on the verge of collapse. The ruthless Xerti commanders were so utterly focused on the annihilation of their old foes that they didn't notice the human fleets blink into the system. Now here is something to keep in mind. Human culture is heavily steeped in the beauty and elegance, all sculpted curves and sweeping architecture. Their art, buildings, cities, and even their clothing, brilliant masterpieces. Everything about them is artfully tasteful, except for one thing: their warships. Those were all sharp angles and menacing spikes, hideous hulks of thick, jagged, jutting armor that bristled with weapons, black nightmares lurking in the slow starlight of space. They were absolutely terrifying, and they were absolutely determined. The Orion Federation was just as shocked as the Xerti when the human forces warped into the system with guns blazing. The Xerti Armada was quickly overwhelmed by the human firepower and found themselves being systematically destroyed. The stunned Xerti commanders couldn't believe at how much firepower the alien ships were putting out. Even more shocking was how much punishment their smaller vessels could take. They were a veritable damage sponges, capable of soaking up even the strongest of the Xerti attacks with little effect in the thick human armor. The result was scores of shattered Xerxes ships littering the area in the clouds and swirling hull segments. Disabled Xerti dreadnoughts listed powerlessly in the empty blackness of space, their methane atmospheres venting vapors and glittering crystals that slowly spiraled into the void. The battle was over in less than a day, with the victorious humans chasing the few surviving Xerti warships out of the system with their tails tucked between their legs. When the war ended, the ceremony was held honoring those who fought in the Battle of Perseus III. The Orion Federation presented a golden plaque of priceless brontium to their human allies with a single word stenciled across the mirrored surface: friendship. End of story. Story number 3. A False Pretense, written by True Knight. Species? Asked an obviously bored clerk. Human, replied a very well-muscled hunter. You don't just approach the League of Predators with your any average person. You need to project strength, confidence, and some held-back ferocity. A few clicks and taps resonated from behind the clerk's desk. Physical traits conducive to killing prey. Examples include claws, fangs, venom, etc. The very bored clerk was staring rather blankly at his terminal. His hands weren't visible, but the hunter guessed that they were on something not unlike a keyboard. The clerk himself was from a species that resembled an old earthen dragon's. Fangs, talons, and probably most of the important part was the species could breathe fire. A useful predator ability, without a doubt, cooking your meal at the same time you get it. Extreme stamina. The clerk looked up from the terminal, obvious annoyance exuding from him. Many species, both predator and otherwise, boast high stamina, and, as such, that trait does not qualify. The clerk gave the hunter a once-over. You certainly don't look like a predator. You don't see any claws, ridges, spines, horns, fangs. Do you even have venom sacs? The ability to breathe fire or inject poison, with only natural parts of your body, no technology of any sorts. No. What about the ability to pulverize bones and organs internally without causing external damage? The clerk looked dubious. The human definitely did not look strong enough for the first place, but he decided to follow up with a sheer sense of duty. Maybe, show me on this mannequin. The mannequin looked a standard sentient herbivore species, like someone you might run into in the street. The human got into a fighting stance and threw the strongest right hook he could. The readout above the mannequin's head climbed in value. A punching strength game. The number settled at 800. That didn't look great in this particular readout. 2 of the 5 digits still read 0. Sorry, I'm afraid that doesn't qualify. The minimum score of 2000 is required for punching ability to qualify as a predator skill. The clerk now showed obvious disgust on his face. You should be embarrassed. There are herbivore species that hurt harder than that. The clerk again tapped on the keyboard some more, and some minutes went by before he looked up at the human again. Given the lack of obvious strength or any natural weaponry with which to kill prey, humanity is hereby disqualified from the League of Predators until such time as any previously mentioned change. However, before you leave, for clerical purposes, I need to know what your species hunts. This information is in no way will change the status of your application, but will be used in your species resupplies for admission. Well, I'm so glad you asked, replied the human. We hunt predators. The clerk had but a moment to express shock, and then the world rang unbearably loud and filled with white. He felt an impact on the side of his head, and the world went black. End of story. And that, my friends, is the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the author, check the links down below for the original link. But if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways listed down below. But the easiest would be to share this with as many people as possible to help the channel grow. And I will see you all in the next video. And until then, I hope you all have a good one. Cheers.